The weaponization of the United States government against its own citizenry is very real. It happens on a daily basis, and it doesn't just happen to high-profile political figures.
Former Trump National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, found himself at the center of a national firestorm when he was investigated by the FBI for fabricated ties to Russia. In a case riddled with contradictions and inconsistencies, Flynn was charged with lying to the FBI. Back in 2020, in a candid two-part interview, he shared his story with us.
The deep state buried me 6 feet under. The American people saved me. And if there's something I'll get emotional about is that.
As revealing new documents are released by Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, we sit down with this 33-year military veteran to understand how he sees everything that happened to him almost a decade later.
And maybe one of these days Tulsi will do it. Maybe she'll give all the transcripts out to show that what I was doing is I was protecting the United States of America from enemies, foreign and domestic. And they knew it.
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Yanya Kellick. Michael Flynn, so good to have you back on American Thought Leaders.
It's great. I love it. And I watch American Thought Leaders all the time. I wouldn't say that I watch every minute of every show, but I think the people that you have on are people that are out there, doing the work that needs to be done, and it's fascinating stories, fascinating people, and I think that's what people are looking for these days. I know that's why we're here today, to talk about a story that most people can't believe.
This is the whole thing. I mean, of course, I've been reading Pardon of Innocence, and it really is astonishing. I mean, it's been such a long time. We've been covering this story at the Epoch Times. I mean, let's just start at the beginning. You, as the National Security Advisor for newly elected President Trump, were speaking with the Russian ambassador.
There's been a lot of stories and a lot of reports on that, a lot of shows on that, a lot of discussion about that. And what was it the right thing for me to be doing? Was I okay to be speaking to foreign counterparts? And the answer at the end of the day is, yeah, I was doing my job, right? And even the President of the United States, President Trump, even said it after the fact. After I had departed the White House, he said, "Hey, the guy was just doing his job." And so I don't know what the big deal was, but then he said that that I had misinformed or lied to the vice president, which we now know that actually wasn't true. It wasn't a true statement. He said it as though it was true because that's what he knew at the time, but it turns out that it actually wasn't true, and we learned about that in evidence. I think that it's not just the conversation that I had with the Russian ambassador, it's actually the result of that, and then what we have experienced, because here it is, that was 2016. Here we are in 2025 and halfway through 2025, and it's almost a decade later. And I think the bigger sort of strategic issue, Jan, is not so much the conversation and rehashing the conversation and what it meant or what I did. It's actually, how does the government weaponize itself against the American people? And in this case, they made a conscious decision to weaponize themselves not only against, General Mike Flynn, but also the incoming National Security Advisor, which is a monumental role in our government, huge role, huge responsibilities. And they made a conscious decision to weaponize components of the government against the President of the United States himself. In this case, the incoming president at the time was Donald J. Trump. The discovery for all Americans and for anybody that listens to this show, this interview, is that the weaponization of the United States government against its own citizenry is very real. It happens on a daily basis, and it doesn't just happen to high-profile political figures. It happens to every single day Americans, where somebody does something that in this case, the FBI or the Department of Justice doesn't like. And what they do is they put the full weight of their authorities against any American who can't financially afford it, can't emotionally sustain it, and really doesn't have the wherewithal to be able to even understand what is happening. And the next thing that happens is they find themselves in a place where they have to plead guilty to something that they know they didn't do, because otherwise they're going to be completely crushed and their families are going to be destroyed, which in many cases those things already happen. And so I became the fulcrum of what essentially is a color revolution that's still ongoing in the United States of America. So people can look up color revolutions, in history. I mean, there's a lot of color revolutions that have occurred. I mean, going back to almost really the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. We learned a lot of lessons, color revolutions in the Philippines, color revolutions in Poland, color revolutions certainly in other parts of Europe, Yugoslavia. At the time, most Americans don't remember, but in 2014 there was a color revolution in Ukraine. Post the Sochi Olympics in February of 2014. That's when the Russians attacked into Ukraine. Now, the Russians, this is just the Russian Federation, and they blame it on the encroachment of NATO. And I'm going back to this example because, so when Trump won, it was a shock to everybody because the heir apparent was supposed to be Hillary Clinton. And that's when there was a decision made. So they took the color revolution and they basically ran a play. They ran a scenario right here in the United States of America, right? It's the Nancy Pelosi, create the smear and then attack, even if it's false, right?
The wraparound smear.
The wrap-up smear, she calls it. The wrap-up smear.
Right.
Which was, it's crazy, but she got out and spoke about it. She actually went out and spoke about the wrap-up smear, how to destroy somebody, and that's what they were doing to President Trump. But a guy like me, back to the question of the conversation I had with the Russian ambassador, what they had to do is they had to connect some dots, and they did. And when they connected those dots, they did it in a way that allowed them to have this story. They needed their minions in the media to be able to push it and promote it and to propagandize it and to get it to where, some number of enough people needed to believe that Mike Flynn, committed treason, was a traitor to the country. The number of names that I've been called, it's gotten to the point where it doesn't even bother me because I know who I am and I know what happened, and I knew it then, but I had to get through it. So we have seen almost a decade of evidence come out, evidence that you guys out of your great organization have been extracting from the government, other organizations like Tom Fitton, lawyers, people who've been battling to get to the truth of what actually happened. And now we have even more revelations by a Democrat, right, who really is an American patriot, and somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, right? I mean, they knew that if they allowed me to go into the White House with Trump, and they didn't bother going after Trump the way they went after him, that this whole thing would have been exposed. It would have been exposed very early on. Obama had said to Trump, "Don't hire General Flynn." Where does that come from, right? Transitioning the entirety of the U.S. government from one president to another, and you talk about two people. One is a dictator in North Korea, and the other is a general that was appointed twice by Obama, right? Because they knew that I would have dug in and dug my heels in because that's my way, and that's been my sort of background, certainly in the military and in the intelligence community, and 5 years of my life in direct combat operations. So they knew that I would have had access to all this information, right? So one of the things that they talked about was something called the Presidential Daily Briefing. They made a conscious decision to change the Presidential Daily Briefing. So they purposely and intentionally left out information or changed information in it. There is an element of subversion inside of our government that's very real. There's been such an effort to subvert this government, and one of the principal nation states behind it are the Chinese. There's no doubt. So during the Clinton administration, one of the things that they allowed, particularly in the second term of Bill Clinton, was they allowed the Chinese government to begin to send a large number of students to colleges and universities, and they also had massive spying operations. So this began in the second half of the 90s, and all it has done is it's grown and grown and grown in time. So what the Chinese decided to do is they began to really work hard on taking over the United States of America in a very sort of subverted way, in a very quiet, covert way. It all ties into 2016 and 2017 and your question about this famous conversation I had with the Russian ambassador, which amounted to nothing, right? They knew, and you can go back and look at, a lot of other things that I've said over time or I've written about, and I've been writing about things for a long time, about this issue, about the rise of communism in the United States of America. What drives me is this country, and that's where Trump and I connected. If there's one thing that we both firmly believe in, it's the greatness of America. Frankly, I'd love, and maybe one of these days, maybe Tulsi will do it, maybe she'll give all the transcripts out of my conversations with not just him, but others, to show that what I was doing is I was protecting the United States of America from enemies, foreign and domestic. And they knew it. So the Obama administration, Obama himself knew it because he was being briefed on it. And that more and more that's going to come out. And people in this country, people that listen to this broadcast, they need to understand that evil exists. We're in a tough spot still. We're not out of the woods yet. And that's why people need to understand that this fight is still ensuing, because this revolution is not over. This color revolution is not over, because the players that are in charge of this color revolution, they are still out there on the streets of America. They're still out there in the media. They're still out there in the political realm of our system of government. Federalist Paper 2 and 3, and we wrote about this recently, John Jay, who was one of the authors of that, talked about the greatest threat to our country is never going to be a foreign foe. It's always going to be somebody. It's always going to be a subversion within, right? From within. So many people have warned us about that. Abraham Lincoln was another one. When he was 28 years old, talking about, no foreign foe will ever take a drink from the Ohio or a step on the Blue Ridge. Never. Even with a Bonaparte for a commander. If we're going to die by our own suicide. He said that at the age of 28 years old. So many people that were prescient and visionaries and historic figures that were worldly and thought about these things, and also were men or women of action, would always talk about this kind of behavior and potential and possibility. And here we are. We are now in a place where this is it. This is a moment of existentialism for the United States of America. And I think that people are going to have to come to grips with it. And it's not that everybody's got to get behind Donald J. Trump. It's people need to get behind this idea that we need to continue to be a constitutional republic based on ideas and based on the rights of citizens, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Because all three of those things can be taken away.
One quick sec, Mike. We're going to take a break, and folks, we're going to be right back. And we're back with author of Pardon of Innocence, General Michael Flynn. So you yourself are deeply experienced in the realm of information warfare, which has been a centerpiece of all of these weaponization activities for the last, decade plus, right? So how does it work?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. So first, you have to, an event has to occur. So you have to create something, create an event, and the event that occurs is in most cases staged, and it might be demonstrations on a street, it may be demonstrations in a square, overseas. It might be the assassination of an individual. It might be a conflict between two warring parties, literally, a conflict overseas, like in Africa, I saw a lot of this, and I saw it certainly in Central America in my early days in the military. So you have to have an event. You create the event. Once you create the event, then you take the components of what part of your plan, and that's the intelligence community. It's members of Congress in our country, as members of Congress, because they're going to be part of it. Some of them are going to be witting, some will be unwitting, but you know what their behaviors will be once the event occurs because you've studied them enough. This is where your intelligence system kicks in, and the intelligence system is not 17 agencies and and hundreds of thousands of people. It's actually a small group, so you have to have a small group of people that are part of this event crisis moment, and they have to be ready to go to town, go to work, right? You also have to have your elements inside the media, and you have to have, in our case, you have to have staff over in certain parts of the government. So the bureaucrats, right? So there's bureaucrats in Congress, there's bureaucrats in the Department of Defense, there's bureaucrats in the Department of State. So these are the elements of your plan, right? So when you're looking at the plan, you have the event, part of the strategy for the plan is you've got to have all of the different pieces in place. And once you've said, this is what we're going to do, we're going to overthrow this country, we're going to assassinate this president, we're going to destroy Donald Trump, and we're going to get him to quit, or we're going to maybe do something worse. I mean, there's been 2 assassination attempts on Trump, just in the last year alone, year plus now, and we still don't know the results of those. We don't know the outcomes of those. So you got to have.
We don't know how they happened.
We don't know. We don't know who's behind it.
Right. Okay.
We don't really know who's behind it.
Yeah.
In the case of President Trump, the event was an unexpected event. His victory in 2016. So when they failed to get Hillary Clinton over the hump and win the election in 2016, then it kicked in, and now we know the 8th of December, now it's going to be a very famous meeting now, 8 December that Barack Obama led, and there is clear evidence now that laws were broken and violated, and we'll see how this plays out over the next couple of weeks, because people in this country are demanding accountability, and I do think that a big component of this is trust. American people don't trust our government anymore. They don't even trust the government that Trump now is in charge of. They're having a really difficult time. You mentioned China. You mentioned about the Epoch Times and the creation of this. I mean, so I'll add because we talked about this briefly prior. And I met these 2 guys. Unrestricted warfare doctrine was not put out publicly until the late 90s, and they actually wrote another appendix to it in, I think, 2003.
And just to clarify a couple of things. One, I commented earlier that it was in the 90s that the Epoch Times founders actually came to America, coming after the Tiananmen Square massacre and after the student movement had collapsed, and ultimately founded Epoch Times in 2000, and which I think to the great benefit of the American people and globally. That's one part. The other part, it was just simply the 2 colonels that wrote this famous treatise, Unrestricted Warfare. You've actually met them.
Yeah. What I think people need to understand, because my military career was a big part of it was during the days of the Cold War, the Warsaw Pact, Soviet Union and the West, and also was looking at and studying the rise of China, and the greatest threat that we face, in my military career for a large portion of it, externally, was China, because of everything that they represent for what they want in terms of how they want to see the world, and they do see the world. I mean, I've read parts of their 100-year plan, right? Which there was a lot of it was classified until like 1997 timeframe. I think we declassified a big chunk of it, but those are things that I have studied. And China saw the United States rise as it did in the last century and made a conscious decision that we're going to be what the United States was in the 20th century, we're going to be that in the 21st century. Their 100-year plan was going to really, occurred from 1949 to 2049. But with Xi in charge, Xi made the decision, no, we're going to make it go faster. So we're going to actually, I want to see it happen by 2030, 2035. So they really got involved in this. It is the proverbial winning a war, without ever firing a shot. I mean, it really, this idea of propaganda, of information, of using intelligence in a smart way, of subverting, learning about the weaknesses of our system of government.
Of using the COVID pandemic and fentanyl, you
Yeah,
talk about both those
biological
things in the book.
warfare.
Yeah.
The methamphetamine was the earlier days, not just cocaine and some of the other drugs that entered the streets of America. And then all of a sudden it turned into now fentanyl. So the Chinese were very smart about who they were going to work with. And they began to work with the drug cartels because, one, it's a lot of money, but that's less of it for them. The money is an element of it, but it's about undermining and basically physically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually killing the United States of America, and doing it in such a damaging way. When you think about fentanyl, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of Americans that are killed in action on the battlefields, on the streets of America. Never mind the wounded in action, right? To use military terms.
And that's the unrestricted battlefield from the Chinese perspective, which is everything.
Yeah. One of the things that we know recently, but it doesn't get a lot of coverage in the mainstream media, is the use of biological warfare against our farming industry. Okay, bringing in biological components to damage or destroy, in some cases, entire components of our agricultural industries. Okay, of our farming capabilities. Never mind making sure that you have people in here that know how to do electronics, that know how to, they come in and now they're citizens. Now they're citizens of this country working directly for the Chinese government. Some of them are in our government. Some of them are actually in our government. This is the grand strategy, the grand geopolitics that's at play constantly. And now we're beginning to see the ugliness of the underbelly of what we've all referred to as the deep state. I talk about faith in the book quite a bit, and I do believe that this was a period of history that the United States of America had to experience, and I think that God ordained this period of time, and he put people into a place where we are able to fight back, and Donald Trump is one of them.
Well, Mike Flynn, it's such a pleasure to have had you on.
This has been great, Jan. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining General Michael Flynn and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.